didn't make this candle or this phone or this microphone or this computer or this ceiling fan by myself. I believe I should acquire all those things voluntarily. Or this movie, think of how many people it took to make The Godfather. That's people cooperating voluntarily. Who makes the cameras? Who makes the suits that people wear? Who makes the food those people eat to survive to make the suits? It's all about cooperation that is voluntary. So in the definition of the freaking word, we're back to defining things. Things should be voluntary.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another version of Anarcho-Poco 24/7, 365, the interviews. And we're also doing this in collaboration with the State of Anarchy. Today, I have a very special guest, and it's Keith Knight and his Don't Tread on Anyone show. Keith has been an absolute inspiration to me in a lot of different ways. The amount of work that he's done and the amount of reading he's done, the amount of information he's put out there has affected a lot of people. Even James Corbett, for example, is one of his frequent readers. But Keith, I'll just start off by saying thanks a lot for all that you do. We really appreciate the message that you keep carrying, the effort that you make, and certainly the content that you put out.
Well, so hey, thank you. Thank you so much for watching, and please share the videos. That is what I ask of people if they find value in them. Of course, I try to do different segments, whether it's I focus on book summaries or propaganda analysis. So I keep those playlists. There's still a ton of stuff. I'm at like 455 videos. So there's definitely a big archive. Even though I've been slowing down recently, there's still a ton to hold your attention. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. Yeah, and actually the thing that really kind of caught my attention and made me want to get in touch with you was something that James Corbett referred to, and it was I think it was a question for Corbett on, do we ever really get out of anarchy? And you had highlighted an article by Alfred Kuzman from quite a few years ago that kind of pointed that out, that really we don't ever get out of anarchy, and it's to some degree it's the ruling class that are the real practicing anarchists these days. And so where did that come from? Where did you find that article, or what spurred that video?
That is something I came across when I was listening to Stephan Kinsella and Tom Woods. Basically, it's just attempting to arrive at a logical foundation for who gets to call the shots in society. Should we vote on things? Well, if one group of people votes to enslave the other, is that morally justified? Well, long story short, you come to the understanding that people own themselves because with regards to others, they have a better claim to their time and their body. And with the property in the world, the objects that are non-human, anything that you achieve or acquire through voluntary exchange or original appropriation, homesteading, becoming the first person to mix your time, energy, and effort with something, well, then that is yours and you have a greater claim to it than others. That fundamental understanding is so important that when you start reading about all these different ideas from people like, if you just look at people like Walter Block or Murray Rothbard or Mark Passio or Stefan Molyneux, or Larkin Rose, they all end up at the same place: voluntarism, natural law, voluntary exchange, homesteading, yet they all have these totally different starting points. So when you're researching the philosophy of anarchy, you realize that when something's inherently true, people arrive from it from, a thousand different ways. And I thought this is definitely a different way that I'm used to understanding the philosophy of anarchism, and when no person or group of persons has the right to rule over another. Well, what does it mean to rule others? Well, basically it means initiating violence. That is the difference between the rules in my house. Well, if I start selling stuff out of my house, it's now a factory and a business. Now, I don't have any more or less rights than I previously did. I could still call the shots for my business. Just because it's my house that I'm selling things out of doesn't alter morality. So having an understanding of what it means to rule over others is for you to claim is for you to say you have a higher claim to someone else's person than they do, which is to say you believe in slavery. Anyone who believes in violence believes they have a better claim to someone else's time and property than that person. Therefore, you believe in slavery. So when you're looking at the philosophy of anarchy, you come across many criticisms such as, but if we had anarchy, see, here's what would happen. You'd have A and B, and then they would get into a fight, but they would belong to different protection organizations. They have different philosophies on life. And the only thing they would do is they'd just start killing each other. So what Cousin does is say, well, doesn't this, give me a second here, I'm glitching a little. Okay. What Cousin says is, that's an interesting criticism that definitely applies. You know who else it applies to? The state. First of all, do governments ever go to war? Do governments ever cause violence? I mean, so obviously giving someone a state does not solve, well, violence might exist. It's like saying bad parents might exist. Therefore, we need Casey Anthony. It's so ridiculous. So that is the first objection. The second is, well, states are in a state of anarchy within each other. In other words, there is no planetary government between the US and Canada and Uganda and China. So the trillions of dollars a year that America trades with China goes pretty peacefully. Even though there's tons of bumps in the road, it doesn't justify the existence of a state. So this is the common thread that I often see is if we take the state's claim, but without government, people would be uneducated. There's a government now who monopolizes compulsory education, and people are so ignorant on every topic statistically that how can you possibly make that claim? Another thing you can do is say, well, it's a total non sequitur to say problem X exists, therefore one group of people called the government group gets to initiate violence against people in hopes of solving the problem. Whether they solve it or not is, of course, never addressed. In fact, if there is a problem, their funding increases and the amount of power they get increases. So it's more about developing a philosophy of applying principles consistently and taking a criticism and saying, does that also apply to the alternatives to anarchism? And every time it does, because the philosophy is pretty refutable. Anarchism, all you have to do is explain why institutionalized violence is justified, and then explain why one group of people has a monopoly on that violence. If it's inherently good, why are they all hogging up the violence? Everyone should be able to initiate it at any time for whatever reason. But then you come into the contradiction. You have the right to rule me and I have the right to rule you. Well, if I have the right to rule you, I have rights that I possess, yet you don't have rights over your own body. You come into a contradiction inherently. So that is sort of how I came across the article and my sort of philosophical approach to the article's ideas.
Well, there's a lot there. Let me start with, I guess there's always words that we need to define, and certainly one of those words is anarchism. What would you say your definition of anarchism is, and what would you say to those people that that have different definitions? There are definitely those like the ANCOMs, for example, and they've got some historical basis for how they view anarchism. And then the ones that may go even further and say, anarchism is essentially that nihilism, that essentially there's no rulers, there's no God, there's no nothing, we don't have anything. It's just absolute nothingness.
Well, when words are used for so many centuries, the definitions change, so it's important to go to the etymology of the word. An, meaning without, and archon, meaning ruler. That means essentially no rulers. Of course, I mentioned before what I think it means, what the right to rule means. You have the right to make rules. You have the right to initiate arbitrary rules on people who have not consented to being, I guess you can't consent to being ruled any more than you can consent to being mugged. It's sort of a contradiction. So if I agree to the terms of something, well, then you're not ruling me. I've agreed to do so. If you say I have to apply or I have to abide by these rules and you'll cage me if I don't obey them, and I've never voluntarily contracted with you with property you've acquired through voluntary exchange, well, then you're claiming the right to rule me, which is illegitimate. Well, if you have the right to rule me, then I have the right to rule you, and then we're back into that contradictory cycle. The only consistent approach is self-ownership and the non-aggression principle. voluntary exchange. So your second premise was, okay, the anarcho-communists, and there's anarcho-capitalists. How do we know who is right? So this is where the understanding of no rulers comes in. And here's why only anarcho-capitalism is legitimate. By anarchism, we mean no rulers, no person or group of persons has the right to initiate violence, thus ruling over other peaceful people. Capitalism can only be defined when you understand communism, communism being the abolition of private property as defined by Karl Marx in 1848's Communist Manifesto, socialism being the institutionalized aggression against private property and voluntary exchange, and capitalism, the only consistent definition is a social system based on the explicit recognition of private property and non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. Nowhere in the definition is there money or bosses or banks or buildings or John D. Rockefeller or sweatshops or anything like that. All those are people's, in the same way the definition of government doesn't include gulags. They happen to commit a lot of atrocities, but that's not what makes it unique, thus defining the term. So that is my definition of capitalism. Now let's say you are an anarcho-communist. If you believe in no rulers, yet believe in the abolition of private property, that which is acquired through voluntary exchange or original appropriation, what you quite literally believe in is other people have the right to initiate violence against other people. So if A and B make a voluntary exchange, Mike, come over to my house and clean things up. I have a lot of stuff to do. Now, if you say no, well, maybe I'll persuade you with money, or I'll, do something to try to entice you for it. And you eventually agree. A and B are engaged in a voluntary exchange. C, the communist, believes they have a right to initiate violence against this peaceful interaction because one person or group of persons might be exploiting the other. What they forget is I, the greedy capitalist businessman, well, if I need food, I have to sell to customers, and I'm at the whim of the customer. The customer is the bourgeoisie exploiting me. Without them, I starve. If I don't please the customer, I die. Therefore, capitalists and businessmen are enslaved to the customer, down with the consumer. Well, of course, that's what they say about the business owner or anyone who invests time and postpones consumption to make the world a better place. So they are also engaged in a contradiction. You don't have the right to rule others, and anyone engaged in voluntary exchanges, we're going to initiate violence against. You don't have the right to. So they will also say, well, it's not fair. I mean, you just charge rent to people, and rent is like theft, really, because you're taking money. Not when it's done through voluntary contract, any more than going over to someone's house is really kidnapping, because in both scenarios, you're both at a different place than you previously were. You're a buffoon. So let's say I walk past a agricultural field, there's nothing in it, and I just keep walking and do nothing with it. The communist says, oh yes, that's a good thing, keeping Mother Earth, the way it is. You're not exploiting anyone. But if I build up 100 homes and then offer voluntarily, say, hey, here's 100 homes that didn't exist. I contracted with a construction company to build these. Anyone who wants it now has more opportunity than they previously did because of me. By the way, we want this for, sorry that, my Ethernet cord broke, so it's going to be a little rough the next week. So now that I am offering something, well, now I'm exploiting people. When I gave no one houses, I was fine. But now that I'm offering people a choice, now I'm exploiting. If I create nothing, then I'm not exploiting. But if I build a hospital, then people have a right to health care, and the state should collectivize it if I don't hand it over for free. It's ridiculous. It's okay to make no food, but if you grow food, well, then people have a positive right for food now, all of a sudden. Did people have these rights when these things didn't exist? A right to penicillin before Alexander Fleming invented it? It's so ridiculous. In short, anarcho-capitalists are anarchists, the only legitimate anarchists, even though communists had the name first. Correct. That means nothing. I have a no theft philosophy, and that's what I'm calling it. By the way, it doesn't apply to the Hells Angels. Okay, well, then it's not really a consistent philosophy. You're just calling it a name. Oh, but I invented no theft. I am only, my definition of no theft is correct, and it doesn't apply to this arbitrary group called the Hells Angels. Of course, but child mistreatment is bad, except for the Catholic Church. I'm running a child mistreatment against philosophy. Well, of course, if you don't apply the principle consistently, then you lose the word by definition. Just calling yourselves that thing doesn't make you that thing any more than me calling myself Channing Tatum makes me a millionaire with a six-pack. So yeah, anarcho-communists are not anarchists. They advocate initiating violence against voluntary interactions. Anarcho-capitalists are because they believe in the private property ethic, natural law, and a consistent philosophy, the only consistent philosophy with human existence.
Awesome. So what about those that take it to that next level of, essentially nihilism, and say that the anarchists are the ones that are essentially no rules, no rulers, no recognition of God, no recognition of natural law, any of that kind of stuff. Where does it stop in regard to natural law, common law, all these kind of things in your mind?
So the argument in itself claims that nihilism is not an aspect of it. If no person has the right to initiate violence against another person or group of persons, well, I'm therefore making a moral claim. Therefore, it's not nihilistic by definition. So what, of course, the opposition will try to do is say, look, here's anarchy. This small aspect represents all other groups within there. That represents the philosophy. Now, take the Kuzan approach. Can you apply that to government? I mean, God, government's about dictators. Look at all the dictators over there. Yeah, you can also say, look at those ANCOMs calling themselves anarchists, throwing a trash can into a Starbucks. That's what anarchy is about. Actually, hilarious intellectual, when someone throws a trash can into someone's private property, it initiates aggression. Aggression is uninvited coercive interference. So the only argument you have against anarchists committing atrocities is it violates the consent. Your appeal against anarchists is anarchism. Dunce. They don't even know what they're saying half the time. So in their attempt to refute it, they actually acknowledge its legitimacy. Anarchy isn't legitimate. Look at those people violating the consent of others. Well, you just embrace the philosophy inherently. You're engaged in a performative contradiction. So that is what I would say. And you can't say something is nihilist. Really, if anything's nihilist, you know what? I give up. Whatever that group writes down on paper, we're just going to obey, and if we don't obey them, according to the courts, who constantly are interpreting legislation in like a trillion different ways, if we don't obey them, they get to kill us. Which one is nihilistic? I mean, millions of people have to obey the rules of people who are knowingly corrupt. I mean, if you say politicians are corrupt, everyone goes, yeah, I know. Then why do you believe in obeying them? Without them, there'd be chaos. They constantly cause chaos. Doesn't really matter. So if anything, it by definition is not nihilistic, or else it wouldn't make the non-aggression principle claim. And then in just reality, if someone's saying X is immoral, they can't be saying morality doesn't exist, or else they wouldn't be making the claim in the first place.
All right. Now, and I don't want to spend too long on this these definitions, but voluntarism, one of the things that I think a lot of the statists essentially throw at people is, well, you're in a voluntary contract. You've signed a voluntary contract when you, essentially became a citizen of our state. What do you think about the idea of the voluntary contract, and possibly we can even touch on the social contract?
Sure. Well, what would make a contract legitimate is if you voluntarily signed onto it from the owner of the property. So if I'm born into an apartment complex and I grow up there, I have to follow the rules, not because the apartment complex is so much smaller in size than government. It matters that the apartment complex owner had made rules on property he acquired through voluntary exchange or original appropriation. That's what makes it legitimate. So one gang signing over, the Gang of France signing Louisiana and 5 states over the Gang of America, of course, is not legitimate any more than, buying Alaska from the Russians. two groups of people that don't own anything trade it. Hey, you know what? I'm in a good mood for a good deal. I'm going to sell you someone else's house. Well, you don't have the right to make that claim, obviously. So what makes government illegitimate is they claim the right to rule people and property they have not contracted with or acquired through voluntary exchange. So therefore to say, well, you were born here and you didn't move. Well, that doesn't mean I consent to it. You live here and you know rape, murder, theft exists and you chose to live here. Therefore, you condone those things. No, I don't. Well, then move to Somalia. Look, pal, the obligation is not on me to move to Somalia. The obligation is on status to stop initiating violence against peaceful people. There are things you can change, like I wish people spoke a different language. And that is something you have to work within a society to change by definition. And if you don't like it, you either have to live with it, go elsewhere, or engage in trade-offs, try to persuade people. But as far as when you're dealing with an objective morality, well, then there's no amount of moving that is justified. Sometimes you might do it for your safety. Compton's not looking too good. I'm going to go elsewhere. But still, the obligation is on the people to stop initiating violence, not on you to move elsewhere. The social contract, again, is illegitimate because if it were, anyone would have the right to enforce it and anyone would have the right to impose it. I mean, let's, if I just look at Penguin Press, you have benefited from Penguin Press because of all the books that people have read and the intelligence that they've shared with the world. Therefore, they get to take 10% of your income and cage you for victimless crimes. Yeah, I don't think so. If you read, there's a great book. It's called How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization by Thomas E. Woods Jr. And look, you and I and a lot of people have benefited from the Catholic Church. They don't have the right to tax me. That doesn't initiate a social contract. I live in Chandler, Arizona. There's a ton of stuff built here today that drastically increases the value of my house. Thanks so much. I have really benefited. You don't have the right to initiate violence under the guise of taxation or laws or anything like that. So soon as you start applying these principles to non-state actors, suddenly they're violations of rights, which of course they are. The anarchist isn't really making any crazy claim, except we hold the state to the same principles we'd hold any other person or group of persons to. That is my initial argument against the social contract. The work of Michael Huemer in his book, The Problem of Political Authority, goes through the actual history of the claims for the social contract from Hobbes to Locke. And those are my justifications for believing it's illegitimate.
Man, I love the way you make an argument. You know, it's one in which you back it up with a lot of literature. And that's one of the things that I really have benefited from you is some of the book recommendations that I've gotten from watching some of your content. But yeah, let's just talk about the power of freedom, the real benefits of freedom that come about when people have that opportunity to actually embrace freedom in a community of people that understand the rights that each other have to essentially contract.
So the great benefit, the great utilitarian aspect is people make decisions for themselves and get to achieve their own goals. Now, sometimes, I'm not saying that it's perfect, and just by definition, everyone will be happier. The reason statism still exists is because some people don't want to admit they're wrong, and they currently reap some benefits from the existence of statism, as you would if any group was stealing $4 trillion annually. It's impossible to not benefit some people when you're doing that. Just as my Catholic Church example, people benefit from that and would hate for it to go away. So anything voluntary is legitimate. As far as why people should embrace it, it's not as big of a sell as I thought it'd be to say, but no one would initiate violence against you. It's like, yeah, but I'm part of a cult and the cult loves me and we will contract. It's a pretty good deal. So it's hard for people to often give that up when they feel the sense of camaraderie. What they miss is you can still have that without one group of people having extra rights and justifying violence in the name of the collective or the state or the patriotic intention or, the war against terror, which of course they fund half the time. So As far as the benefits, I would say, well, what do you benefit in your everyday life from? Like, what if someone followed you around the store and said, I'm going to cage you if you don't buy these items, and if you do buy these items. If you start introducing new aspects, they'll say, well, that's unjust and that's unjust. And you go, well, how is it any different if you have to fund the compulsory schooling education? How is it any different if you have to fund a military who I think has committed a couple war crimes that WikiLeaks and the Afghan war logs have leaked out, not to mention Vietnam or Cambodia or Laos or anything else. So if you say, don't you love the voluntary aspects of the life you already live? Should we extend that or restrict that? If we should restrict it, why shouldn't it apply to these other areas? So I think telling people that, or anything they value. So for example, I value books. If someone said, you can read A, B, and C, but we'll cage you for reading X, Y, and Z. Ideas are so dangerous, they've led to communism and fascism and mass murder. So we need to just regulate ideas. We're not trying to control you, just regulating. See, we changed the words and now violence isn't violence, of course. You'd be able to see right through that. So if you start telling them that you're going to extend the scope of violence into areas they do like, well, all of a sudden it's bad. But it's easier when you say, well, we're just doing this to regulate the 1%. We only engage in mass murder to fight the terrorists, this other group. It's not going to affect you. Of course not. The income tax is only going to pay for this First World War and some interest to the Federal Reserve. And it's only going to attack them. Well, of course, in every example, we're only spying on the bin Ladens of the world. What are you going to defend bin Laden? And of course, Snowden leaks that, as well as William Benning. They're spying on everyone. Of course, they always have been. So, yeah, I would say people can grasp the value of freedom when you explain to them the value they already place on current freedoms they have, and explain to them how much they would value these other things. Look, it's no coincidence. The areas of freedom that people fear are the ones that the state tends to tell us, oh, be very afraid of. So yes, I would say that is how I would communicate the value of freedom to the average skeptic. Of course, never skeptical of state power, only of anarchists saying things should be voluntary, but yeah, that is what they call themselves.
One of the other things that you're well known for is really your rhetoric and your ability to kind of dissect all the fallacies that come about through the propaganda in the media and so forth. And that is another area that people are really rather unfamiliar with when it comes to how, how they're kind of conned, or, and how so much information is misrepresented, which then leads to all kinds of conflicts and stuff like that, because people misunderstand the meanings of so many things and the context of so many things. Where did you get that, the knowledge and the understanding of all the logical fallacies and cognitive biases and all the things that's out there in the world these days in regard to the advertising and the media misrepresentation and the propaganda and the public relations?
It's definitely just a learned method of critical thinking. It's not necessarily about memorizing, oh, what's the name of this fallacy? I have to call it out. Once I've called it out, I've responded to the argument. It's about being able to dissect things at their core and applying principles consistently. It's hard to think up examples, but the best thing I like doing is, like, I caught an article by a U.S. senator, and it's just incredible. I mean, it's this real short article that takes me 37 minutes to get through, and that's the short version, because there's so much, and propaganda by its nature is not long and extended. It's really just in your face. Treason. What? Hold on. When you say treason, there's so much involved in that. First of all, were the American founders treasonous? Any person you associate with is by definition treasonous to someone who has a conflicting vision of the world. So the fact that you're going against the group actually means nothing. What it is it's an argument of intimidation tactic. I'm showing disapproval for you. Feel bad. Feel like you're not part of the cool club. You're not in the in-group, Mr. Treasonous. It's like, how can you really look at the Bradley Manning scenario and call him the treasonous one. It's like treasonous against who? Mass murderers, people who are killers. Let's just apply that consistently. What if someone breaks into your house and is going to kill you? But wait, one more detail. That person was born in America. I don't care where they came out of their mother from. Oh, they came out of their mother on this geographical line, therefore violence doesn't matter when they do it. Look, I have the right to shoot anyone who initiates violence against me or breaks into my house. So the fact that, well, those war crimes were committed by our soldiers, they're yours, our? Are you part of the group? Do you have a top secret clearance? No, you're not part of the group. The only reason you'd say that is because that's obviously an implanted idea. There's no rationality behind it. So I'd say the book that really got me interested was called How to Win Every Argument, The Use and Abuse of Logic by Madison Prairie. He runs the Adam Smith Institute. And just looking through those logical fallacies, you're able to actually dissect an understanding of what makes some arguments fallacious. For example, we've been doing this since the days of the founding fathers. The fact that something has existed for a long duration of time has no weight on whether or not it's morally justified or it's truthful. In the same way, when the progressives say, this is new, we need change, we need to progress forward, we need to evolve. Just because something is new doesn't justify it either. So it's being able to stop, pause, and rationally dissect each part of what someone's saying, because they'll try to really get it all together and just throw it at you all in one propaganda bowling ball. This way you can't intellectually diffuse each aspect of it. That I would say that was the book. Also, Stefan Molyneux doing a rebutted series where he would just go through lines in an article and rebut like everyone. It definitely is just being able to turn the switch on and be very alert and say, hold on. Just saying the word pro-worker, like this senator did in the last article I read. He goes, George Will is against pro-worker policies. Okay, why are you focusing on an individual instead of an idea? The reason is obviously because if an individual holds an idea and you criticize them, well, it's easier to dismiss the idea as a whole. In the same way, criticizing a group of anarchists is easier than the philosophy itself. So that's one part of one sentence already. Having to go through that takes a lot of time. The second part was pro-worker. What does it mean to be pro? Do you know what's in the best interest of millions of strangers? How do you know that them losing their job, they might not get a better one? Just because you're pro something doesn't mean the state has the right to initiate violence against other people. In fact, if you're anti-trade and pro-worker, what if I am a worker and you say I can't buy something from a different geographical area and you're going to cage me or charge me 30% higher than I otherwise would under the guise of a tariff? Is that pro-worker? All these things, and that's one sentence of the article that I did. So it's mostly about being able to have a critical thinking switch and catch words or euphemisms. God, the state is huge with the euphemisms. We believe in gun safety. And by that you mean the state should coercively monopolize weaponry and shoot everyone who resists such a monopoly. Once you're able to see through it, it's pretty easy. So it's about learning logical fallacies. I'd say that book is terrific. There's a free PDF online, I think. And yeah, it's just about it's about hearing the same thing 50 different ways, the same fallacies 50 different ways, and then you really grasp an understanding, and then you can see them everywhere. And especially where it really matters, when legislators and bosses and advertisers use them. So yeah, it decreases the likelihood you'll be irrationally manipulated, which is always a good defense mechanism to have.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think as far as all the, a lot of the things that most people are conflicted about and spend most of their time arguing about, most of it is just a misunderstanding on a logical level. Would you say that's true?
That is so true. So when they say, you're for anarchy, well, I'm against chaos. I applaud the state for indoctrinating you into thinking freedom is chaos. That is brilliant. No rulers means violence and chaos. You just got to give it to them on that one. Well done. But it's wrong. I'm against capitalism. And by that, I mean, I'm against a sack of money with a dollar bill sign and a guy with a monocle and a top hat. That's what I mean. It's about getting people to not use association terms and getting people to really think. This even happens on Fox News. They go, oh, that program is socialist. Really, what's wrong with socialism? Isn't it just about helping people? All the socialists I know just talk about helping people. Well, because once they get into the understanding, they realize, well, the military and police are total socialist programs by definition. I mean, they buy private things, so they're not totally communist, the abolition of private property. But getting definitions down is so vitally important. So when you're talking about definitions, that is not a waste of time. If all I do is get people to discuss definitions and have the same definition of a word, we're pretty much all the way there. I mean, half the country thinks equality consists of giving 535 congressmen trillions of dollars a year and the right to cage people for victimless crimes. That's how dumbed down the populace is with not being able to think of definitions or apply the meaning of words consistently. So it's all about having an understanding. Wait, before we talk about free market, are you saying money has to be involved in all transactions? No, of course not. I mean, voluntary transaction, and that's it. It could be in the form of a gift or anything peaceful. So when they get you to associate free market with money and business and hard labor, well, then, of course, you're not going to like it, but the same thing applies. Government is not, by definition, the CIA engaging in mind control experiments. That is one arbitrary aspect of what government is, or what the state is, which is really a group that just claims the right to initiate violence on people who haven't contracted with them and on property it hasn't acquired through voluntary exchange. Definitions are so vitally important because it really would clear up so much of the disagreement. What do you mean capitalism? You don't care about the poor? Me saying things should be voluntary is what I hear when someone says anarchism and someone else hears chaos. You're building the foundation of a conversation on such a level where you're not even talking about the same things. So everything that comes on top of that is almost meaningless. If all we did was focus on definitions of words, people would be on our side real quick. And we wouldn't be totally introducing them to crazy far out ideas. Privatize everything. Oh my God, how would this look? How would that look? How would nonsense? It's just getting down to the definitions is so often a great deal of our problems. Absolutely. Excellent point there. It is absolutely vital that we are talking about the same thing before criticizing or saying it's virtuous.
You know, in fact, you know, I was just actually watching your last thing there. You were talking about that article that was critical of George Will, and I think the subtitle that you put is "Libertarians Hate Community." How do you feel about you know, the argument between the individual versus the collective, and is that another false dichotomy that that people are being steered towards when it comes to?
It absolutely is a false dichotomy in the sense of, do you support the individual or do you support the collective? Well, that is the false dichotomy. What matters is, do you believe in violence or voluntarism? Are you a voluntarist or are you a coercivist? So the example I think I gave, I don't even remember. But if I say, I'm going to do what's in the interest of the anarchist community, that is me thinking in a group think, and that's totally justified. If I choose to do it, then I'm justified in doing so. The problem is that people will say individualism, okay, that's about one person, an individual. Okay, so it's obviously themselves. So they're selfish, thinking of one person. The collectivist thinks of many people. They think of the group. They think of more people. Therefore, they're generous. So what would I rather care for, one person or many people? That is the false dichotomy that they obviously push. So the fact that you believe in using voluntarism to pursue your individual choice, that's totally up to you. It's your life. Live it up. Not sure there's an afterlife, so let's really appreciate this one while we have it. I don't see anything wrong with. I belong to Mormonism. I belong to Scientology. I belong to the physics group, and whatever I do is going to be in the best interest of that. Or if you just say, I'm going to do what's in my interest, so long as in both realms you don't initiate violence, you're morally justified. Absolutely. It definitely is a different way of thinking. But yeah, individualism matters because you're saying it's wrong to initiate violence against all people. And you look at a group of people as a group of individuals, all of whom have no more or less rights by organizing. Whereas the collectivists will say, yeah, X is justified because it's in the collective. So it's the difference between saying this is good for human beings versus this is good for a concept or an idea. And whenever people start throwing vague concepts at you, watch out, hold on to your wallet, because you're about to get robbed. We're doing this for the 99%. Really? The people in Haiti? Oh no, I just mean people in America. That's what you mean by a percentage of human beings, the richest country in the world? So yeah, of course, whenever people try to engage in false dichotomies, it's always to justify some irrationality under the guise of, I'm doing this for the group, I'm doing this for a higher ideal. Well, if you're doing it for the group and what you're doing involves initiating violence against the group, I support the white race. And you believe in government, you believe in initiating violence against the white race you say is okay. If I love something and I initiate violence against that person, if I love someone and use violence against them, is that really me being for them? Aren't I coercing their free will, stopping them from being who they are? So again, yeah, that absolutely is a false dichotomy when seen on those lenses. We have to worry about violence and voluntarism more so than, are you focused on one group, a small group, or a larger group?
Yeah, I would, one of the things that, in regard to kind of I think a bigger picture of this idea of, always creating people having like two sides of an argument and being in perpetual conflict is really there's a graph that essentially represents cooperation versus assertiveness, as an individual. And at the absolute maximum of both of those is collaboration, which is, everybody wins. And, unfortunately, that's, they essentially steer people towards picking one or the other. And in both cases, the opposite is actually true. You don't get collaboration. You don't get something positive. You end up with either doing what other people say or just being a tyrant,
And of course, that is what libertarianism, anarchism is about, voluntary cooperation. So the fact that again, to say every man for himself, that is such a brilliant propaganda move. It's wrong to initiate violence, is what libertarianism says. They interpret that as every man for himself. Well, if every man is for himself, then initiating violence wouldn't matter. If you're on an island, you can't initiate violence against a rock or the sand or yourself, because you just own yourself. You can't steal from yourself either. So a philosophy that's inherently cooperative, saying people should cooperate voluntarily, has been thrown to us as everyone doing everything by themselves. No, I didn't make this candle or this phone or this microphone or this computer or this ceiling fan by myself. I believe I should acquire all those things voluntarily. Or this movie, think of how many people it took to make The Godfather. That's people cooperating voluntarily. Who makes the cameras? Who makes the suits the people wear? Who makes the food those people eat to survive to make the suits? It's all about cooperation that is voluntary. So in the definition of the freaking word, we're back to defining things. Things should be voluntary. You want everyone to do their own thing? The only reason you believe that is because you're under mind control. There is no logical way you can get from things should be peaceful to everyone should be alone. If they're peaceful, it has to involve two or more parties. That's like saying marriages should be voluntary. You want no one to get married? No, it's inherent in the word. Cooperation, voluntarism, peaceful exchange does not mean people doing things on their own. Heavens, it's just so obvious that that only the result of unclear thinking can actually get you there, to believe that voluntary exchange means no exchange. That's just incredible.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of steer this towards community because I wanted to end on kind of talking a little bit about something that I really has brought me to where I'm at, and that's I live in Acapulco, and I came to Acapulco in 2015 for the first Anarcho-Capitalism, and I really kind of fell in love with the community of people that are anarchists. Being around so many anarchists at one time was just a total transformation for me. And I never wanted to leave that anymore. And so that's why I've embraced what I call the Anarcho-Capitalism 24/7, 365 community, one in which, I don't ever want to leave that circumstance. But, Anarcho-Capitalism is coming up in February. We are actually doing something we're calling AEX 2020, which is an event before and after. And what we're trying to do is embody the real positive that I think I've gotten out of Anarcho-Capitalism, which is the connections with the other people. So trying to encourage people to get together and not necessarily just follow after the celebritarians of the movement, but actually connect with other people that share the same principles and understandings, and may be able to help each other, and collaborate on things. And so that's what AEX is about. We're really focused on 5 different themes and the 4 different archetypes. If you're familiar with the book, King, Warrior, Lover, Magician, we're going to cover each of those in specific ways through the themes of the individual days where we're doing stuff. But Keith, what's your view on Anarcho-Capitalism and the community as a whole, and what's going on community-wise?
Yeah, I am so grateful that Jeff has put on that conference. It's amazing to see. There's a few, and now it's 2,000 people are going to be there. It's I'm just that does that. As far as the community, haven't really stopped and paused about the progress of how the ideas are reaching people. I know in 1966, Walter Block said, I was in Murray Rothbard's apartment. I said, Murray, how many consist? So Walter Block is hanging out with Murray Rothbard in his apartment, and he says, how many libertarians are there? And Rothbard says something like 15 or so. And now there's 2,000, and that's only the people who chose to get up and go to Anarcho-Capitalism for tickets that are, expensive, the flight's rough, it takes a few days out of your time, but now that people like, Berwick get all these views, you have people like James Corbett, who in other areas, who a historical researcher is now embracing the principles. It's great that we have so many people coming to the ideas. And even if they're criticized, it's far better to be criticized than totally ignored, as we definitely learned with Ron Paul in 2008. So I'm pretty optimistic, considering all our arguments are philosophically sound and not based on technicalities of, did you hear Trump's Ukraine call? Listen to this good argument. That's going to be irrelevant in a week from now, just like Stormy Daniels and North Korea and Iran and the Billy Bush tape. So instead of chasing, the headlines of the week, we're discussing principles. So I'm very optimistic.
Right. So Keith, have you made it down to Anarcho-Capitalism yet? And if not, how can we get you down here?
Oh, you know what? I'll probably go next year. That is something I'd like to do. I'd love to speak there. I have a number of presentations: the case for anarchism, the case for capitalism, America's foreign policy of deception, lies, omissions, and criminality. Or I could do a propaganda analysis. It's not something I'm able to do this year with my work schedule. But oh yeah, of course, I'd love to come down in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, I've got I didn't really actually consider myself an anarchist when I came to Anarcho-Capitalism. The thing that really drew me to the first one was the fact that James Corbett was going to be there. And
really,
that was that one thing. And then there was also kind of an entrepreneur workshop that I wanted to go to that I thought might be really useful. But those two things, and after that, I came down with a couple of suitcases, me and my girlfriend, and we never left. We've been in Acapulco ever since 2015, and Unfortunately, the girlfriend has left and gone on her way, but I'm still here. I still love this place, and I really, I embrace the idea that you should come early and stay late, because it's not just about the fact that this is in Acapulco and it's a beautiful tourist location, but it is also about the people here. The Acapulqueños are what I would consider the closest group of people to really kind of living a voluntarist, anarchist kind of point of view. You can pretty much ask any Acapulqueño, what do you think about the government? And they will say, are you kidding me? They know. They know. And that's a beautiful thing as far as I'm concerned. And that's kind of the right, seating ground for what, the kind of concepts that we want to bring to the table. And that's kind of another thing about, what we're doing, with myself and the State of Anarchy crew is doing with the AEX 2020 is to really embrace the community that is Acapulco and the people of Acapulco, and bring them into this discussion too, and understanding as well, because that is another element that I think is really important, is really kind of creating the model that other people, when they come to Acapulco, when they come to Anarcho-Capitalism, they can see how that happens in real life, how anarchy is actually practiced in real life every day, all the time. It's a wonderful thing. And you'd be surprised at how well behaved Anarcho-Capitalism or Acapulqueños are when it comes to, just helping each other. My friend, my driver, my right-hand man, Victor, and I were out on the road one day coming home late, and a guy on a little scooter crashed in the middle of the road on the hill, or road going up to the hill that I live on. Every single car stopped. Every single person ran out there and met the guy in the middle of the road, picked him up, picked up his motorcycle, picked up all of his stuff, put him back together. That's the kind of that's the kind of understanding and community that's here. And that's something that's really magical to be a part of. And that's one of the other reasons that I love Acapulco so much, is that it is one in which they have a much better understanding of how the value of taking care of other people ends up making it a better place for all of us. So with that said, I'll leave you with some time for some closing arguments, or anything that you want to say about what you're doing, some of your future projects, what's going on in the future for you.
I would just ask people to check out my BitChute channel, Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. I also have it on YouTube, of course, and minds.com and archive.org. I just don't want to put too many eggs in the YouTube basket, knowing that things are getting a little Orwellian over there. But it's a great place to still pick up some attention. I ask people to check out maybe my book summary playlist. I try to read some books and it's more of a book analysis / summary that I try to do. I have 41 interviews with professors on libertarianism. So that is another thing that people can check out. Also, the propaganda analysis, trying to help people think clearly, is definitely one of the objectives of the channel. So that is all I got. Mike, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure, Keith. And I will definitely be staying in touch with you, and certainly, keeping up with your content, because I love what you're doing, and I definitely, encourage you to keep it up, because you're doing a great job. You're a real pillar of the community, and we appreciate bringing that argument out for the rest of the people to understand, and being a role model for the rest of us.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. Have a good one.
All right.